In this franchise, we've seen the Raiders come close to a Super Bowl title, but never actually get there. When we last left off, the Raiders had just lost the AFC Championship, when it looked like they were going to be primed for a Super Bowl run. Well, after 2 years away and accepting that I was fired after a failed season, I decided it was time for me to rejoin the Raiders and try to get this team and try to get Denzel Stockton a Super Bowl title. I wanted to finish the job that I had started in this series. And here today, this is the final episode of the Raiders franchise. And you'll see the journey of me trying to put the pieces together. And you'll find out if I was ultimately successful. We will end the franchise today. Denzel Stockton will retire at the end. I will cover everything that I did here in this long final episode. If you enjoy this video, it's a different one. Please leave your feedback, leave a like on the video, and stay tuned for something new very soon. When I was taking over the Raiders, of course there were a lot of decisions that were already made and contracts that were handed out to players like tight end Drew Keller. I had a big challenge in this upcoming offseason about replacing Josh Jacobs, because his retirement left us with Tyquan McClellan as the lead running back. We were so used to having a top-flight running back in this franchise, this was a very new reality. But this offense had, of course, Stockton and 3 good receivers, a star tight end, and I liked the defense in place. And I actually liked some of the moves that were made in the 2 years I did not manage the team. Despite the normal development, I was actually very intrigued with JoJo Faulkner. He did not have a great rookie season, but I felt like he was being played out of position and kind of by necessity because there were 2 edge rushers already in front of him, so he was just an off-ball linebacker that played 2 downs. Going into the offseason, I took a look at the NFL draft, and I was kind of disappointed I wouldn't have a chance to draft Michael Cruz. He looked really good as a prospect, and he's literally got like a quarterback in a football movie caliber name. But let's look at the running backs, because I had to replace Josh Jacobs. I wanted to know who would be out there. I primarily focused on the running backs and the offensive linemen in preparing for this first draft class. I thought Roman Aiken looked really good, and I knew I'd have to consider spending that first round pick on a running back if I wanted to get somebody who could start and make an impact. But at the same time, it was a really good offensive line class. So if we could find a running back a different way, I knew we could lean O-line with our first pick or maybe our first couple and get some building blocks for the future. When it came to re-signing our free agents, thankfully we've been a pretty good team for a while, so re-signings get pretty easy. We do offer a 1-year deal to Max Crosby, and he comes back. And then Deshaun Woodward was due his 5th-year option, but he hadn't really taken a massive step, so no need to pick up that option. We ultimately only make 1 signing here in this stage, allowing a lot of the roster to test free agency. And by the way, when it came to Michael Farrell, when the CPU re-signed him, he was listed as an outside linebacker. And these off-ball linebackers that are listed at outside linebacker always get weak deals. He had like a 2-year, $8 million contract. I edited his deal to be more in line with what he would have gotten as an inside linebacker, and then moved him there. But let's go to free agency. Penei Sewell was out there, didn't have interest in us. Chris Lindstrom. The O-line looked really good, and so I went there immediately to look at the centers, and Eric McCoy was someone who immediately grabbed my attention. I wanted to make sure we could build up a good offensive line if we were going to have a new running back. We know in these franchises, running backs rarely hit the ground running, and they're very reliant on their offensive line. I also looked at the left tackles, and there were a few options, but I decided to go for Charlie Morrison and offer him a multi-year deal. I then offered a deal to Jared Watkins at defensive tackle for a little depth there. Good to have some defensive line depth. We've seen success there with players such as Milton Williams. And then I wanted to add a safety and decided on Jordan Battle because he was a scheme fit and an 82 overall. Free agency was very successful as we signed those 4 players, and I felt like that filled a lot of the important holes on the roster. I still had questions about who would be opposite Ramon Hayes. I felt like we had to prepare for what we're going to do after Devin White, but we didn't have to solve all these problems immediately. There was regression for a lot of players, but many of them were still pretty solid. I felt good about our kicker situation. Remember when I drafted Cole Winter in the 7th round? He has been a success at kicker so far. We go back to free agency. We have a little extra money. I wanted more running back insurance, so I offered a deal to Danny Smith, and he actually took it despite me removing all guarantees and only giving him a base salary. So we had a couple mid-70s running backs going into the draft. Offense was my main focus. Running back and offensive line, depending on how the board fell. The O-line showed really good depth in the first 3 rounds, whereas with running back, you typically have to go early. The Titans would end up taking Michael Cruz with the number 3 overall selection. He's a very good, strong-arm quarterback. We did look to trade up here in the first round. We tried, were unsuccessful, and made our pick at 29. And ultimately, my first selection back would be running back Roman Aiken. And we get things started here with a hidden dev running back. Aiken, a 22-year-old player, 74 overall, has speed, elusiveness, and a foundation to be a very complete player. After that selection, I wanted to move up in the 2nd round, but we were picking at 61, and I really liked Cole Trapp. I thought he was a first-round caliber player, very good athlete. There was so much to like in his skill set, so I did give up the 3rd-round selection and a future 2 to move up from 61 to 34. And all that for Trapp to end up with normal development. I couldn't believe it. 21 years old. First-round caliber athlete, 82 power moves. This was still a player I believed in, but I was shocked he did not have hidden development. These 2 picks would really summarize our draft. I'm not going to go over every selection if it wasn't consequential in this franchise, but ultimately those were the 2 main players. Plus I took a fullback late because I missed the good days of having Nolan Irwin. I would also make a couple UDFA signings, trying to build some more depth on this team as it gets older and a lot of players have expensive contracts. But to me, it was fun to get this ball rolling with my return to the Raiders and trying to replace Josh Jacobs with somebody I was thrilled about. I thought that was a home run pick and a pillar for the offense moving forward. Combined with the offensive line additions and players like Charlie Morrison, I felt really good about building a team that could be immediately ready to go back to the AFC Championship. Seeing that previous team get so close and fall short, I wanted to try and close that gap. It was a big motivator in coming back to the series like this. So we'd get the 2031 season underway, and we'd start 1-1 with Roman Aiken having a good performance in his 2nd career game, scoring a touchdown against Miami, and then we'd fall short in week 3, despite him running for 100 yards the first time in his career. Not much offense in this game, neither team was able to break 20. With a 1-2 start and the Chiefs at 3-0, we would take on the Dallas Cowboys, and it was a big bounce-back win thanks to Denzel Stockton's 5-touchdown performance. We believe in Denzel Stockton now, right? He gets us out of that 1-2 hole. Tyrese Chambers, 2 touchdowns in this game. We then win against the Tennessee Titans, and in this game, we would see Cole Trapp record the first sack of his career. I felt like, just like with JoJo Faulkner, there was a lot of potential there even with normal development. We would open the season 3-2 and get ready for a matchup against Kansas City, who was bouncing back from a 6-11 season and now was the front runner in the division. A big part of that is that they have replaced Travis Kelce with another elite tight end in Caleb Howell, although he has not had elite production since 2028. Kevin Cohen was still the quarterback in KC, who had also been their quarterback a year ago, but he was playing much better in terms of touchdowns to interceptions. Patrick Mahomes was still in Washington playing on a one-year contract, so we wouldn't have to deal with him. But could we handle this new version of the Kansas City Chiefs? With the Raiders at 3-2, trying to get that fourth victory, they lead 17-14 in the final minutes. You know, we've always been about building up the secondary and the pass defense in these franchises. We make back-to-back plays there. We have Devin White on fourth down getting us the football back. And then you got the rookie in just his sixth career game. And we ask him to finish the job the way we asked Josh Jacobs to so many times. And Roman Aiken would get us down inside the 10 with a first down to clinch it, and the Raiders would win 17-14. At this point, I felt very good about Aiken's development. You never know with these rookie running backs. And the Raiders would then prepare for a matchup against 5-2 Jacksonville. We would lose that game by 3. Denzel Stockton, 3 touchdowns, but also 3 touchdowns for Trevor Lawrence. And we really could not run the football at all in this game. 2.1 yards a carry. Just not enough in this one for the Raiders. We would also lose Jaden Perkins around this point in the season, and he would have to miss much of the rest of the year. The injury, combined with him being 29 and falling off in terms of production, had me wanting to look at replacing him sooner than later. We would win 2 games in a row here mid-season, including a game against the Cincinnati Bengals, a rematch of last year's AFC Championship. High scoring, but the game goes to Las Vegas. At 7-5, we would go up against the 8-4 Chicago Bears, but we would be missing 2 edge rushers now as Max Crosby joined the injury report alongside Jaden Perkins. Crosby missing these 3 games would ultimately give JoJo Faulkner his first chance to start full-time as an edge rusher, as Dayo Odembo was on the opposite side. So now it was my chance to see what we truly had in Faulkner. At the same time, we had to handle contracts, of course. Always, we give a 5-year deal to Alex Ramsey. Then we give a 5-year deal to Deshaun Woodward, along with kicker Cole Winter. I felt like 5 years was a good call for all 3 of these players. We would go on various winning and losing streaks over the course of the year. We'd have this 11-point loss to Chicago, getting run all over by Danny Fulcher, one of the up-and-coming running backs in the franchise. And then we'd lose to the Chargers, 27-24. As always in this franchise, it's frustrating not being able to be as good as I felt we should be. And we would go into the last week 3rd place in the division, with a real chance of missing out on the playoffs entirely. The week prior, we had just dominated Detroit, getting 7 sacks and 2 interceptions as a defense. That was Max Crosby's return game, and he returned with a vengeance. And the Raiders would at least be faced with a win-and-in proposition in Week 17. Or Week 18. I'm still not used to the whole 17 games instead of 16. But here we are, late in the game. 4th quarter, Raiders kick a field goal to go up 20-17, hoping the defense can hold Denver. Quarterback Darren Smith back to pass. He floats it downfield and hooks up with a wideout behind Jalen Johnson. They take it down inside the 20. And then Darren Smith finds Cassidy Harris for the touchdown, and the Broncos take the lead. We'd have 4 minutes to go and answer back with a touchdown of our own. So with the game on the line for Denzel Stockton, you know he's looking to Drew Keller. He always leans on his tight ends to make plays. Drew Keller in the middle goes inside the 30. Now 29 yards away and dumped off to Keller. He'll make a man miss and get first down yardage. And then we'd be faced with 4th and 10 a few plays later against the heavy Denver pressure. That pass is knocked away from Rashad Bateman. And it looks like Denver is moving on with a win. They just need a first down to end it. 3rd and 7. Nobody there for Darren Smith. The Raiders get it back for one more drive. 56 seconds left. Still got to get to the end zone. Stockton hooks up with Tyrese Chambers. Down inside the 10. Huge breakdown in the Denver secondary. Very close to the end zone. Drew Keller on the second effort nearly gets in. And on 3rd and goal, wide open, Drew Keller, go-ahead touchdown for the Raiders. What a late comeback for Denzel Stockton. This would be a 3-point game with under 30 seconds remaining. Raiders just have to keep them from getting a big play, and that's exactly what Denver gets. Up the seam, huge connection to the 28, and the Broncos are able to kick the tying field goal and force overtime. So we continue on. Raider ball, first drive of overtime. Stockton again to Drew Keller. He doesn't want to throw it to anybody else most of the time. Couple plays later, 3rd down. What a throw. Caught by Tyrese Chambers. We wanted to keep this ball out of Denver's hands, and that's Bateman up the seam to bring us to the 20. Then we get the rookie involved. Roman Aiken, the stiff arm, the juke, the speed. So many tools in the toolbox. Very next play. Keller ends it. Raiders win in walk-off fashion. It doesn't matter how tight that window is. Stockton can find his star tight end. And the Raiders would get themselves back into the postseason as the 6th seed. 3 teams from the division ultimately made it in. Denzel Stockton had 38 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, a very impressive stat line. Roman Aiken would inefficiently get himself over 1,000 yards, but it's about what you expect with sub-80 overall rated running backs. Drew Keller would lead us in catches and receiving yards this season. He would also have a career-high 12 touchdown catches, taking the Raiders' receiving triple crown. I wanted to see somebody else break out, but there were a lot of receivers to get the ball to in this offense. And defensively, Max Crosby would lead us with 15.5 sacks. Cole Trapp, only 2.5, very quiet season for him. And JoJo Faulkner would have a step up from his rookie year, but no major breakouts. We would first see the Jaguars in the playoffs, but it was looking like this would be it for Max Crosby, that he would call it a career and this was his final attempt at winning a Super Bowl. That fires everybody up. These are always very good for morale, and he's one of those stars I wanted to get a ring in this series. We failed with Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams. Max was the last of those big stars remaining. And we get off to a very good start by blowing out Jacksonville with Stockton throwing 4 touchdowns and out-battling Trevor Lawrence in this game. The offense had the kind of day I think they should have more often, and Max Crosby has 2 sacks. We would advance to take on the number 1 seed, Baltimore Ravens. The previous year we blew them out in the division round matchup as well. This was the rematch as we continued to rally behind Max Crosby. We'd have a pretty rough week of practice leading up, losing both Drew Keller and Leon Beckwith ahead of this game. Could we really beat the number 1 seed Ravens again, missing 2 very key starters? I didn't expect we could duplicate last year's performance and blow them out again. But that's the way things were looking for much of this game. 24-9, late in the game, here is Derek Law replacing Drew Keller at tight end, able to fight there for the first down. And on 2nd and 10, it's Stockton downfield to the former Raven, and it's Rashad Bateman for the first. From the 15, Stockton, a beautiful ball dropped into the end zone to Marcus Meredith. What a touchdown. One of my favorite throws I've seen from Stockton this entire series. I mean, that is perfect. He did not have to break his stride whatsoever. 31-17, and the Raiders return to the AFC Championship. I'm not quite sure how we blew out the Ravens in back-to-back division round matchups, but we've got their number. And we were again just one win away from returning to the Super Bowl. We've been there once in this series before, and we're one drive away from a title. The Browns had done a good job rebuilding in this series, and they did so around number 1 pick, James Portis. Portis was on his way to becoming one of the best players in the entire franchise. He was only 23 years old and coming off a 16.5 sack season, almost 70 tackles as an interior defensive lineman. And this AFC Championship in Cleveland would be in blizzard-like conditions. Max Crosby trying to fire up the defense for the biggest game of the year to get back to the Super Bowl. How would the Raiders handle the elements? Well, they didn't handle them very well offensively, struggling to put drives together early in this game. In the fourth quarter, struggling to get even a simple screen pass complete. So they've got to kick a field goal and hope they can get the ball back to go and tie things at 17. With the Browns up 17-10. Here they have it at our 34-yard line. And it's Hunter Jenkins across the middle for the first down, hitting Moss, their young star receiver. And then we would have a glimmer of hope here with this sack from Dayo Odangbo. We'd force a Cleveland field goal, 47-yard try, and the kick goes right down the middle, and the Browns go up 2 possessions. Raiders have to get touchdowns now or their season is done. 1:30 left to go. Stockton's throw is dropped by Marcus Meredith. On 3rd and 5, trying to fit it in, and Meredith again can't haul in the pass. We go field goal and make it a 7-point game, knowing our season is now on the line. Looking for one more stop. It's 2nd and 14, and Cleveland breaks off a long run, and that's enough to seal it. On a 2nd and 14, the defense just can't hold the run any longer, and the Cleveland Browns would end our year and advance to the Super Bowl. Another year of coming close and falling short in this series. And it appeared that was going to be it for Max Crosby. But ultimately, he would not retire right away. The Browns would go on to win the Super Bowl against the Chicago Bears. Hunter Jenkins would be Super Bowl MVP, and James Portis, in his 3rd year, already Player of the Year. Max Crosby would not actually retire. He did not want to go out like that, and would agree to come back for one more year. So as we looked ahead to our next offseason, I knew it was time to start allowing some changes to be made. I wanted to let a few players go, such as Jaden Perkins, Devin White, and Rashad Bateman. Devin White had regressed pretty significantly by this stage, and it was time to move on. Rashad Bateman was 32 years old, but I felt like with Chambers and Meredith, we needed to focus more on the young receivers. We no longer had enough cap space to just easily keep everybody around. So we made some of those tough calls. Perkins was not offered a contract. I still wanted to keep around Jalen Johnson. I like being deep at corner, and he's still a very good and productive player. So we would make a couple re-signings, but let a lot of players hit the open market. In free agency, I knew we really had to focus on the offensive line. We had a couple players hitting free agency, and then Eric McCoy retired after the season, so that had to be immediately repaired. I also felt like at this stage, I wanted to go after another big-time playmaker. I wasn't sure if Drew Keller being our highest rated offensive playmaker was going to be enough for us. I felt like Tyrese Chambers was a very good player, but hadn't really taken that next step at the age of 27. He's a good number one, but I think these days you want either an elite, like top 5 player, or you need to have a couple guys more in his tier. I ultimately faced a lot of problems in this franchise with just trying to throw more playmakers at the issue, even if there were more ways to attack it. With $55 million in free agency, I knew I had to go back to the offensive line, and I had a lot of interest in Trey Smith being the best guard available. He had been with Kansas City this entire time, and I wanted to bring him to Vegas. I wanted to also try and replace Devin White, and Otis Sherwood, coming off a very productive year, had my attention. So I did bring in Sherwood, Leon Hillhouse, and a backup quarterback, but was unsuccessful in getting Trey Smith, who chose the Chargers instead. But he would not be blocking for Justin Herbert because he went to Philadelphia. We would then pivot and get Peter Skoronski as our guard replacement. I felt like that was a good plan B. We had lost Jaden Perkins. Max Crosby would likely play one more year. I was not going to be aggressive in trying to chase another edge. Instead, wanting to see JoJo Faulkner get that full year in his 3rd season to start, and then we'll make a decision from there. I still had my mind made up that I wanted to add another playmaker at some point. I wanted one of the best receivers, whoever would be the most obtainable. I still remember wanting Justin Gary in the draft a number of years ago in the franchise, and I considered trading for him, but his contract was really a non-starter. That wasn't going to work. But I felt like Jeff Jones in Miami, coming off a really good year with a much team-friendlier contract, would be a better option. But the issue is just players or teams don't want to trade players. They want you to give up so much, and ultimately I think the trade sliders I've played on have been too high. I've been playing on hard. So we did not make a deal. And we go into this newest draft. I really didn't have a specific position I was focused on early. I wanted to think about going after like a top playmaker if I felt there was somebody with a very high ceiling. Ultimately, I was going with a BPA approach. And here we did see the Bengals already do the kind of the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers thing with Joe Burrow. But in the first round, I really liked cornerback Joseph Cormier, and I knew that Jalen Johnson wouldn't play forever. I wanted to have a top 15 level corner. I thought Cormier had a chance to be that guy and selected him with our first round pick. He would be a true 76 overall with a focus on zone coverage. We then go to our next pick in the 3rd round, remember, because we did not own a second, using that to trade up for Cole Trapp. Well, with our 3rd, we then go defensive tackle and take speed rusher Isaiah Fowler from Clemson. 76 finesse moves, and perhaps a player more intriguing than Cole Trapp, but at a lower overall as he went in the 3rd round. I then wanted to trade up in the 4th round. Didn't like the cost here early in the 4th with Miami. So I then simmed a couple picks and watched the player I wanted get taken by the Bengals. Clyde Stevenson, a 74 overall hidden dev linebacker, would have been the perfect Devin White replacement. But things didn't work out that way. Even in this video, you're getting me losing out on players I really wanted. So ultimately, Cormier was the main player we got out of this draft. But what that did for us was kind of a 2-for-1. It gave us a younger high upside corner and made Leon Beckwith expendable, allowing us to then trade for a receiver that would be a little bit easier to acquire. Damian DuBose, who had come up with the Ravens in this franchise, was acquired for Leon Beckwith, a 4 and a 7. Still steeper than I think it should be, but it gave us that 3rd playmaker I thought we needed, and the contract with him was very reasonable. I had it in my head that this was the kind of move we had to make. Wasn't sure about Marcus Meredith, but get a third receiver in there and just overwhelm offenses, giving Stockton so many options. And then we would have a defense that we had to patch up a little bit with Derwin James, Damone Clark, while trusting a couple normal dev players to get us going. And we did get off to a very good start, going 3-0. JoJo Faulkner would have 2 sacks in those 3 games, matching what he did in the previous year. But now as the full-time edge, he could show that he had grown a lot more in the first 2 seasons. Joseph Cormier would also have 2 interceptions in those first 3 games. So immediately, a couple of my big defensive calls in this series were looking good. Damian Dubose, meanwhile, was seeing Tyrese Chambers have big games, and he wanted to take that next step as well against the New England Patriots at 0-3. We would go on to lose that game, 17-7, of course, and couldn't put up much offensively. Dubose would have 4 catches and under 60 yards, so it wasn't what he was looking for. That storyline ultimately didn't go anywhere. But we did get to upgrade JoJo Faulkner along the way. Felt like with his power moves, he had a chance to have this late breakout, and it was actually happening. 5 sacks by week 6 was really impressive. We'd be at 5-1 up against the 4-2 Cleveland Browns in a rematch of the AFC title game. We somehow keep winning the rematches after losing the ones that matter in the postseason. 3 touchdowns for Denzel Stockton. Chambers catches 1, Dubose and Meredith the other 2. Chambers was in the middle of really taking his game to the next level this year. His yards per game were way up, despite the addition of Dubose. We then had a matchup against the 6-1 New York Jets. Very good marquee game here, and the Raiders end up dominating this one, 24-8 against George Garrison and the Jets. Taylor Seymour is now in New York, by the way. He leads them 6 catches for 60 yards, but 2 sacks for Ramon Hayes. I think things could have gone very differently for Seymour. He never really cracked much playing time early in his career with us, not until late, but I think he had the talent, if we focused on him early on, to actually be pretty successful. In this game against the 49ers, we would lose 9-7. Extremely low scoring. Continuing to struggle running the football, by the way. That was something that really had me concerned, because when you run the football in these franchises, it makes everything so much easier. And I felt like we did what we had to do to have a successful running game, but it was actually getting worse. We were still mostly winning, though. The pass game was doing well. Stockton was having a good season. Just when I'm losing hope in Roman Aiken, he runs for 119, and we're able to get a big win. I wanted to run the ball, play good defense, and keep it easy on Stockton. Somehow, at the 24th highest scoring offense, we had managed to go 8-2. And then we beat the Denver Broncos, Chambers having a very big game again. This was by far his most impressive season. And by the end of the year, we'd be 11-5 going into our finale against Denver. We did have a 3-game losing streak along the way, and this really hurt our chances of chasing down the number 1 seed, of course. But we'd still be a playoff team, and we were trying to win the division. So we dominated the Saints on our way to getting there. JoJo Faulkner would pick up his 8th sack of the year in this game, giving him a breakout I'm not sure anybody would have expected at this stage. But he had been playing out of position for most of his career, and it was now finally in the right spot. So going into the season finale, again we've got Denver in week 18. And we go late in this one. It's a 7-7 game, 7 minutes left. That pass is shy of the sticks to Damian Dubose. So Cole Winter comes out to kick the go-ahead field goal. Denver takes over, and screaming downhill into the backfield to make the play, that's Derwin James. That gives us the football back, under 5 minutes to play. Stockton, nice grab made by the newcomer Dubose. Stockton then throws one across the middle to Dubose. He hangs on to that one. Raiders run it on first down. Aiken breaks out the spin move and moves the sticks yet again. trying to put this game away. Stockton, he drifts back and holds on to the ball too long, and he gets sacked. Denver brings the pressure on the very next play, and they do it again to get the ball back for their offense. And here's Darren Smith, 1:30 left, and watch out, it's Faulkner. Denver met with 3rd and 15, and that's when Smith finds the open receiver. I'm so sick of the coverage breakdowns against this team. They kick a field goal at the end of regulation, and we go to overtime, just like we did in the finale of the previous year. But now, Denver has the ball first, and Darren Smith is sacked again by JoJo Faulkner. 10 sacks on his season. 3rd and 10. Darren Smith again. Tight window throw, first down. Denver takes it down to the 14-yard line. They empty the backfield, and Darren Smith walks us off with the touchdown. He just split the safeties. We walked off a year prior. They do it to us this time around. I thought perhaps this would hand them the division, but actually it did not. We still won the West. The Broncos lost the tiebreaker to us, and we'd go into the postseason as the 3rd seed in the AFC, set to face the Chargers in the first game. And that's when we repeat the Max Crosby storyline. Could we actually get fired up a second time, rallying behind him? I think you only get one real shot at that. The Chargers leading 21-7. Raiders trying to come back in this game, and they are able to tie it in the 4th quarter, and would be forced to do so again with under 2 minutes left. They rally behind Dubose and Chambers to tie it with under a minute to go. Raiders want overtime. Chargers say, how about Jalen Hurts finding the open man? We'll take the lead instead. Unbelievable that we gave that up. This is the least Chargers-like thing I've ever seen. But Jalen Hurts finishing out his career with the Chargers, and they have a lead with under a minute to go. It would take a miracle for Denzel Stockton. He'd have to throw it about 70 yards to the end zone, and he almost got it there. Raiders fall short this time, getting bounced in the wild card round. That's 9 seasons of trying to get this team and Denzel Stockton a Super Bowl. And we're still unsuccessful with a Super Bowl loss and 2 AFC Championship Game losses. Lionel Reed has the big game, including that game-winning touchdown. Jalen Hurts and Denzel Stockton had a really good quarterback duel, but Jalen Hurts is the victor. JoJo Faulkner's story was ultimately the best thing to come out of this year, because unfortunately the running game was a mess. I know that for much of the year we ranked well in terms of yards per game, but that's just because we were running the football a lot. Max Crosby does ultimately retire this year. I assumed he would this time around. What really had me like, what are we doing here, is the run game. Because Roman Aiken would not get more efficient, and I couldn't really figure out why. He was a good running back on a good offense, but he had regressed from year 1 to year 2. That was very frustrating. For the defense, JoJo had a really great year. Max Crosby retired, so I don't get his stats here at the end. Ramon Hayes was solid. Michael Farrell, always productive. Joseph Cormier, 3 interceptions. That would get him Rookie of the Year and a dev trait boost. JoJo Faulkner's season would also get him a boost up to star development, and I felt he had become one of the building blocks of this team. So I did feel really good about the defense and what I did on that side of the ball in these 2 years. I had to replace a couple stars. I knew the edge rush situation was going to be a challenge because Max was getting older. Faulkner gave us a chance. The Jets go on to win the Super Bowl this year, which means that at least a player I drafted in this series wins a ring. Taylor Seymour had 5 catches for 49 yards in the Super Bowl, so shout out to him. But we see more stars retiring now. Justin Jefferson, Derwin James retires from our team. That's the only one outside of Max Crosby. And then we go back to re-signing. And we have Tyrese Chambers, JoJo Faulkner there. JoJo's was the 5th-year option. And all I had to see was the one good year. Because edge rushers, good ones, are going to make $15, $20, $30 million. So picking up his option after a breakout year was kind of a no-brainer. That was an easy decision. And then for Tyrese Chambers to also ball out during a contract year, I was obviously going to give him an extension. He's one of my favorite players I've drafted in this series. It's a good time now to take a look at some career stats, and we see Denzel Stockton up to 277 touchdown passes. Roman Aiken, not that impressive 2 years in, just 6 touchdowns and under 2,000 yards. Damian DuBose, 352 catches behind Chambers, 387. Drew Keller at 433. Ramon Hayes, 50 career sacks, another one of my favorite players drafted in this series. But ultimately for this next season, what my new goal was to fix the running game. That needs to get right. We have the passing game, we have that stuff in place. Let's do what we got to do for the O-line, and let's run the ball. We're going to let players like Jalen Johnson go because we just need the money in new spots. It's time to move on. So I looked to free agency for players like Tyler Linderbaum, who was one of the best centers in the game. And then to replace Max Crosby, I wanted to at least attack a good edge rusher. So we did offer a few contracts to those players, along with safety Byron Dobbs. Right guard Quinn Miners was available, and I felt like his style of play would be really beneficial to trying to get this run game better. And free agency was really solid. We signed those 4 guys along with a power running back. And I felt like, all right, I've thrown more resources at this running game. This needs to work now. This was kind of my make or break year for Roman Aiken to show that he could take that next step and we could get at least a step closer to replacing what we once had with Josh Jacobs. It turned out that we still had cap space and Jalen Johnson wanted to come back, so I was able to sign him to a 1-year contract. And we still had that good 3-deep corner situation. My draft approach was to scout the offensive linemen and then look for anybody that looks like they can be a superstar. And I thought Raheem Moss had that chance. I knew we didn't need receiver, but at this stage, I'm just looking to try to find players who can separate and break from the pack. And I did try to trade up for Moss, but I didn't have the draft paused, and I was offering the Steelers trades when they weren't even on the clock anymore. Raheem Moss had already been taken, so that wasn't going to happen. I then decided to move back from 24 to actually get an extra 3rd round pick, because while I wanted to chase really good players, I also wanted to try to fill more spots and leave us some money to maybe be more active in free agency. So my first pick was Brian Humphrey, a guard who could step in and start immediately with very good run block power. I'm sorry, Moss was still available at this stage. There's a lot to remember here. He was more of a fringe 1st round prospect, and I was trying to move up in the 2nd for him. That's when the Vikings decided to take Raheem Moss a little bit before I thought he would go, and Moss was a 76. If we had taken him, we'd probably trade Marcus Meredith and let Moss go do his thing. Don't worry, I had a backup plan. I really liked Gilbert Meredith. But I wouldn't have to worry about trading up for him because he went the very next pick to Arizona instead. He was a 75 overall hidden dev run stopper. Don't worry, I had a 3rd option. I actually got the deal done this time, giving up a 3, 5, and a 7. I don't know if my trades make sense in conjunction with that first trade down, but Alan Mays. All right, I miss on Meredith. I go get Alan Mays. Hidden dev, run stopper. I was really enjoying doing these drafts, and I know it was more rapid fire, but it was actually really fun to do the rebuild this way. Mays ended up being a really good fit, and then later in the third round, I targeted Tremaine Denard. Athleticism looked good. He looked way too good to pass up, and Denard is a hidden dev linebacker at 74 overall. He can step into an immediate starting role. So this draft focused on 3 players who could make an immediate impact. And this gave us, I thought, a very solid team going into this year. I wanted to see the running game carry its own weight, complement the pass, while we make sure that none of the players we're losing defensively aren't adequately replaced. Getting Sherwood and Denard I thought was really key, and then replacing Max Crosby as well. And things looked good early on. Everything was clicking with a 3-1 start. We were not getting Aiken, significantly better production, no touchdowns 4 games in, but the numbers overall were good, and Tyrese Chambers was still taking his game to a new level. We would lose, though, against the Kansas City Chiefs in a very close game despite a great defensive effort. It was frustrating to look at these losses and see stat lines like this for Roman Aiken. Josh Jacobs, I don't think did that much in this series. We were wasting really good defensive performances like this one. We would fall to 4-3 ahead of a game against Jacksonville, and then we would be able to avenge our loss to Kansas City, again winning a low-scoring game with our defense keeping them in check. I was still upgrading Roman Aiken along the way, but noticed the negative morale. And what we were seeing here is because he was so inefficient, that's one of the things that can really impact running back morale. You'll notice under 3 yards a carry, -3 morale. Combine that with losing at home, you're looking at a guy who's only getting worse now. So by this point, I was looking for other options at running back. I wanted to bring somebody in. I would have loved nothing more than to bring in a really good running back like Juan Hunter, who had shown a history of 1,000+ yard seasons with high efficiency, but you're just not getting anywhere with some of these trades. I offered Marcus Meredith and a 4, and they basically laughed me out of the building, so we didn't acquire a running back at the deadline. Here's a win we had against the Jacksonville Jaguars with a pretty strong defensive showing again. Aiken runs for 98. This was a more complete performance. We'd be 6-4 going into Week 12 against the Washington Commanders. Tyrese Chambers was taking his success from last year and taking it a step further, while the defense was taking away the football with a lot of interceptions. That was really cool to see. We would win 3 of 4 going into the late stages. We would have this convincing win over the Denver Broncos, holding them to 216 yards, getting an interception and 4 sacks on Darren Smith. Tyrese Chambers had a monster game against them. Alan Mays had a pair of sacks. JoJo Faulkner, by the way, he had gone up to an 84 overall by 24 years old and was putting together another season that would rival his breakout the year prior. And we'd go into the postseason with a 10-7 record. We would not win the division, however. We'd make it as a wild card and would face the Ravens again, a team whose number we've had in the postseason. Denzel Stockton had 35 touchdowns to 5 picks. Roman Aiken, 3.5 yards a carry, is not what I had in mind. Tyrese Chambers, 1,430 yards. I loved seeing him break out with the second most receiving yards in the entire league. I wanted to know if the defense would fall off without Max Crosby, and despite not having anybody get double-digit sacks, it was still a very good defense, and there wasn't really a weak link. Getting Byron Dobbs was a really good call for us. Denzel Stockton ultimately finished as the third vote getter in the MVP race. He and Tyrese Chambers were kind of the new hot wide receiver quarterback pairing that was taking over the league. So on to Wild Card Weekend now. We get the Ravens again. All these games have been in Baltimore. And after blowing them out a couple times, the Ravens had finally had enough. And we could not stay in this game whatsoever. Lamar Jackson would avenge his prior playoff losses to Denzel Stockton, as he too would be pursuing his first ring. Lamar Jackson outplayed Stockton significantly in this game, as Stockton only had completed 50% of his passes, and Roman Aiken, why did it have to work out like this? I thought things were going to be so different. This was 10 years for Denzel Stockton. And we still hadn't gotten a Super Bowl title, and we were taking one step forward and two steps back. At this stage, he was 5-8 in the playoffs in his career and was riding a 3-game playoff losing streak. And that included back-to-back wild card losses. The regular season numbers were phenomenal every year. He would rarely throw interceptions. He was regularly over 30 touchdown passes. But in the postseason, he hasn't played at that level very consistently. 10 years, and that's how tough it's been despite having one of the best quarterbacks in the league. The Chicago Bears have a Super Bowl before we can get there as they defeat the Patriots. Jalen Johnson, Quinn Miners, and Tyler Linderbaum all retire. Every year we had this revolving door with our offensive linemen. It was very difficult to try to just keep the team together for Stockton because it was getting patched together with temporary players. What was unique about this next offseason was the financial situation. So you'll notice here $103 million in cap space. But there were so many free agents and a lot of guys who would be difficult to bring back. But I knew I had to bring back Kamari Frederick. I didn't want too many holes on this roster, or I'd be back in free agency doing the same thing all over again. Drew Keller wanted out. I was only able to keep him on the team because of the franchise tag. And then we obviously declined the option on Roman Aiken, despite him being 84 overall. Ramon Hayes is a free agent, wants $26 million. What am I going to do? Say no and then sign somebody worse? I wanted to sign him to a multi-year deal because I knew there was only one way out of this mess. I targeted those players I thought were the most critical, and then I decided that I had to say no to players like Marcus Meredith who just haven't taken that next step. We spent about 70% of our cap space and still didn't have a starting tackle on the roster. A potential starting center wasn't signed. I wanted to start restructuring. And that's when I realized so much of this core only had 1 year left on their deals. And I needed more money to make next year more competitive. I can't restructure somebody who only has 1 year on their deal. And Madden doesn't let you re-sign guys until their contract is up. So my only way of making more money here or getting more cap space was to restructure the multi-year deals we did have. So I restructured Tyrese Chambers as soon as I saw that. And then I went to free agency knowing we had about $40 million to spend. We see Patrick Mahomes is available and a third of the league wants him. But I decided to take that cap space and go after the top tackle on the market, Will Brown. We offered him a contract. And then I looked for players who had a lot of interest in coming to Las Vegas that we could potentially offer less money to, because now I can't pay everybody market value. So I did throw out a couple lower offers to receiver Puka Nacua, and then I came back and took that same approach to tackle Darren Belovis. I don't know how to pronounce that. I did my best there. And we were actually really successful there. We signed 2 offensive linemen to about 25% less than they wanted. We brought in Puka Nacua and a really good lineman in Will Brown. As soon as we got Will Brown, I restructured his contract. It's why I offered him multiple years. Then we restructure Ramon Hayes so he can do the same thing. Deshaun Woodward, Alex Ramsey. I wanted to create as much for this year as I could. And that gave me, I think, about $20 million extra with all those restructures. And what was my plan? To finally get Justin Gary on this team. Every time we'd lose a receiver, I'd feel this need to go and quickly replace them as soon as I could. And this was my big move. I traded Byron Dobbs, the safety who was great with us, a first rounder and a 5, to go get the second-ranked receiver in the NFL to pair with Tyrese Chambers to create the best quarterback and 2-receiver duo with the tight end that the league had. That was my plan to go and get a Super Bowl. I felt like I made the offensive line as good as I could have with just cap space and free agency. What I didn't do is consider maybe being more aggressive in trading for a lineman. But I then traded for a running back because I wanted somebody that could complement Roman Aiken and maybe give us more run game touchdowns. I noticed that Aiken kept running for very few. So I packaged up a 4, a depth receiver, and Cole Trapp to add a second running back to this team. I thought that this would give us the best offense that I could put together. We lacked a first-round pick, did not select until late in the second round. I couldn't see anything here that would immediately help the team, so I went BPA, and I selected tight end Cameron Robertson, a hidden dev tight end who would give the Raiders a future beyond Drew Keller, who was playing on the tag. So that was a nice pick in the late second round. In the 7th, I would come back with a safety and select Bobby Hoskins with hidden development. This was exciting, but he was a 64 overall player. But still, he was the only other hidden dev player I drafted in this class, which only consisted of 4 players. We would go into the new year hoping this would be enough with an 85 overall offense and 84 overall defense. I wanted to see us put together a great season before all these players hit free agency in Stockton's 11th season. Would this finally be it? This to me was the make or break season, especially given Stockton's contract situation. This to me was a complete team that kept getting close, kept making the playoffs, but needed something to put them over the edge. Ultimately, I was going to give Bobby Hoskins a chance also to start at safety because with limited cap space, we only had $2 million left at this stage. At least he had hidden development, so I decided he would get a chance to start. And we'd also spend all of our staff points, not leave those not helping us out. So would this be enough for the Raiders here in 2034? Week 1 is a win for Las Vegas, 28-21. The offense gets off to a solid start with 2 touchdowns going to the new running back Terrell Harris. But it was not a successful debut for Justin Gary, who would have 1 catch for only 6 yards. We would then follow that up with a loss to Kansas City, where the offense was held to 13 points. Denzel Stockton did not have a touchdown, and Roman Aiken had 2.4 yards per carry. The season would not get off to a strong start. With a 2-3 record, the Raiders had one of the worst performing offenses in football. Denzel Stockton only had 6 touchdown passes to 3 interceptions, and he really was not playing well despite good infrastructure around him. The running game was just more of the same, so nothing more to talk about there. I was worried about this team. At 2-4, going up against the 5-2 Arizona Cardinals. This was a pivotal game, and we would blow that one 24-7, not scoring until the 4th quarter. What is going on with this offense? I put more receiving talent around Stockton. I keep going after the best offensive lineman I can in free agency. What I did here is I fired the offensive coordinator, but I couldn't find somebody that had developed skill trees. So instead, I brought back the OC, but I took a look at what his playbook was and decided we're just going to have a little story here where he gets to control the offense now, and we're moving on to the Dan Campbell playbook. And our first game with that is a win over New England, 21-13. But 232 yards of offense. What are we doing throwing for 133? I mean, we beat a backup quarterback in Skylar Brackett. He was literally Stockton's backup during the second year of this video, so I don't really care about this win all that much, especially with the offense still underperforming. We then lose 3 of our next 4, putting more stinkers out week in, week out with one of the lowest scoring offenses, and still, with this division, we were very much in it. I think what it boils down to is I did not focus nearly enough on the quality of the offensive line. I made sure we had serviceable players. I did not make sure we had very many exceptional players. I did spend a first-round pick on Humphrey. I did go out to get guys like Will Brown and Tyler Linderbaum when they were available, but it really wasn't enough. And I think that was my downfall. I did not value the offensive line enough versus playmakers. I continuously threw receivers at a problem that they weren't fixing, and I thought we could somehow extract more offense out that way. We missed the playoffs with a 7-10 record. The Chiefs win the West at 8-9, and we had scored 16.7 points per game. At this point, I felt very defeated, expecting a much different result. Denzel Stockton had one of the worst seasons of his career in terms of just raw output and efficiency. Roman Aiken was still mediocre 4 years in. This baffled me. This feels like when the Patriots took Sony Michel. Tyrese Chambers just lost his production. It went to Justin Gary, but at what cost? It wasn't wins. I think I mismanaged this part of the franchise pretty hard. And this was supposed to be the most pivotal area and season, given the timeline of everything with Stockton's contract, among other contracts. And this felt like the end of an era. We had lost 2 straight wildcard games. Now this year we didn't even make the playoffs. And I knew that it had pretty much run its course with me and the Raiders. I tried for around 10 years. There were 2 years I didn't manage the team. But Stockton was here for 11 seasons. He finishes with 5 playoff victories in that time. And I knew it was time to move on. My next move would depend on what would happen this year, and this was kind of the worst case scenario. The Falcons go on to win the Super Bowl against the Jets 45-35. By this point, Denzel Stockton is the league's #1 ranked quarterback. But coming off a down year where the Raiders have really just fallen apart, it's the kind of year that leads to a full-on reset. And that's what made sense to me. So what I would do next with Stockton not wanting to come back, his #1 motivation is the Super Bowl chase. The Raiders were now viewed as underdogs. He wanted no part of Las Vegas. We would franchise tag him, and then I would look for a trade partner. I was going to trade Denzel Stockton somewhere where a team did not have an established quarterback, but had the infrastructure for him to step in and have a chance to win. And I wanted to give the Raiders a good haul in return. And the team that fit this better than anybody was the Green Bay Packers, who had 2 great receivers, a lot of great offensive linemen, and an established tight end. And Stockton was traded for 3 first-round picks, including the #3 selection, and 2 more mid-tier players that had a big salary that would make this work for Green Bay. And I was set to leave the Las Vegas Raiders after trading away Denzel Stockton, the first big move of the franchise. And my final move with this team before handing them off would be drafting quarterback Michael Harrington with the number 3 pick. The Stockton era had finally come to an end, and the Raiders could start fresh, and I would move on. They put together a very strong draft class. I only drafted Harrington. They would then draft a stud receiver prospect with their original first-round pick, Gabriel Duggins. They would then take a middle linebacker and halfback that were both at least a 70 overall. My next goal was to see if Stockton would ever make it to another Super Bowl. And if so, I wanted to see how that would go. So I would sim straight to the postseason. And first, the Raiders have success with Michael Harrington. He puts together a very good rookie year with 27 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. The Raiders have some work to do. They do not make the playoffs during this year, but they have success with their rookie. They move on from Roman Aiken and honestly do a better job without him. They play Cameron Robertson. They have a good foundation for the future. I felt like I left them with a fair bit of talent and resources to try and rebuild as I leave. But Denzel Stockton would bounce back big time in Green Bay with 37 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. We would see Roman Aiken go to San Francisco, where his same mid-tier play would hold back their offense. And then, at receiver, the Packers would have a pair of 1,000-yard wideouts, including Marcus Meredith, Stockton's teammate with the Raiders. Jonathan Wilkins was their main star receiver. He would go for over 1,000 yards. We also see Drew Keller move on to Philadelphia, where his production slips pretty significantly. Keller was a very good pick in this series. He had a pretty good run in Las Vegas for a while. Ultimately, Green Bay would make it to the postseason as a wild card because the Vikings were just a little bit better than them. They won a tiebreaker in the NFC North, but Green Bay gets their revenge in the NFC Championship. They beat the 1-seed Vikings, and in the first season that he leaves Las Vegas, Denzel Stockton is returning to the Super Bowl. And he does it after defeating Patrick Mahomes, who's now in Minnesota. These two battled forever in KC and Las Vegas. Now they meet up again in the NFC North. Green Bay's going to the Super Bowl, and I have to change teams so I can see this play out. 13-4 Green Bay was the 5 seed. The NFC North was incredible. The Packers had a very good infrastructure for Stockton, a better offensive line than I gave him, and they had picked up a superstar running back, J.R. Smith. So Denzel Stockton, playing in his second career Super Bowl, meets up with the Cincinnati Bengals. It's a team that's eliminated him before in the AFC title. Now he's got a chance to beat them on a greater stage. This would be a high-flying, high-scoring, back-and-forth game for the first few quarters. And we jump in late into the fourth. Green Bay is down 7. Stockton having to rally the Packers. He finds his tight end. That's Dexter Banks, a superstar, one of the best tight ends in the league. Then he hands it off, and it's J.R. Smith, and he cuts it outside. All kinds of room, and he breaks off a long 51-yard run to set up Green Bay in the red zone. Stockton, next play, fires, end zone, touchdown, Dexter Banks. Green Bay has tied the game in the Super Bowl. Bengals look to respond. 2 minutes to go. It's 3rd and 3. Jamar Chase can't hold on to the ball. And the Packers would get it back with under 2 minutes to play. Denzel Stockton would have his chance. The same chance he had all those years ago against Atlanta, and he hits Banks again! Out of bounds in Bengal territory. He's just looking for that one final drive and hits Banks again. First down inside of field goal range. And Cincinnati having to use their timeouts as J.R. Smith runs the Packers to the 21, and then would get the first down and run Cincinnati out of timeouts. There was nothing more the Bengals could do. It's all set up for a chip shot field goal. It's a 21-yard attempt, and the kick is good. Time is left for Cincinnati. Final play of the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow hit as he throws. Caught by Chase, but he's tackled, and the game is over. And Denzel Stockton is a Super Bowl champion. His first year out of Las Vegas, and he finally gets it done. This guy, he couldn't do it until I had to trade him to my least favorite team. Stockton finally gets his ring, and that's how it happens. I haven't had a very successful year on Madden this year. The only Super Bowl I technically win is because of the Green Bay Packers. This is difficult for me. Denzel Stockton would end Patrick Mahomes' career, crush the 1-seed Vikings, and give the Packers a Super Bowl title. That was the sacrifice I had to make for Stockton's ring. Was it worth it? I don't know. The next year, Green Bay wouldn't even make it to the playoffs. We've seen this with Stockton, the inconsistent success from one year to the next. He would not be quite as good in his follow-up season. Green Bay misses the playoffs while the Raiders continue to try building around Michael Harrington, whose numbers aren't special here by Madden standards for a young star quarterback, but he was certainly on the rise, and they were putting the pieces back together coming out of the fallout of my failed last season. Simming through another full season, we'd go straight to the playoffs once again, and now we see that the Raiders are back. The Packers are not in the playoffs. But surprise, Denzel Stockton is now with the New Orleans Saints at 34 years old. So he's now on his third team, and he's brought them to the postseason. There was at least a chance of Stockton versus Raiders in the Super Bowl. Not a great chance, and it ultimately wouldn't happen. Neither team made it to the Super Bowl this season. Stockton did make it into the second round. He would then, in his follow-up year with New Orleans, go 33 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and the Saints would go back to the Super Bowl, while the Raiders went one and done for the second straight year. So now we gotta join New Orleans. Stockton has one ring. Now in his third Super Bowl, he looks to take down the Cleveland Browns and win a second title. But Cleveland is very tough, and the Saints offense could not get going until very late in this game. It was not a competitive Super Bowl, and the Browns won easily 24-7. Stockton loses his second Super Bowl. I thought we were about to see Stockton only win rings with my least favorite team, and then the team I've struggled to win with all year on the main channel. That would have been the ultimate gut punch. He spared me that last one. But the Browns win the Super Bowl 24-7. And Stockton was now a couple years removed from his Super Bowl title in Green Bay. I would check every year to see if he would retire and when he'd decide to call it a career. At 36 years old, he'd go into the last year of his contract with New Orleans and was still ranked the number 7 quarterback in the league. The Raiders now had Michael Harrington at 25 years old and 91 overall with a backup named Derek Carr. I was happy to give the Raiders at least a franchise quarterback opportunity on my way out, and I was hoping somewhere down the line they'd be able to go win a ring. Cameron Robertson was still there. He had become a good but not great tight end. And then remember, I also drafted them Tremaine Denard, and he would become an X-Factor linebacker, actually, as a run stopper. So that was a pretty cool development. He had put together some really productive seasons with a lot of tackles, getting some sacks and some interceptions as well. So we sim through one more year, and the Saints miss the playoffs entirely. They crumble this season. Denzel Stockton, 28 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. They obviously don't make the playoffs this season, while the Raiders make it as the 2 seed in the AFC. They would get upset in the first round by Buffalo, their third one and done since I left, which would give them 6 straight playoff losses, with my years included. The Bears win the Super Bowl this year, but you'll notice it's with a different quarterback than when they won years before in the franchise. Here's something very cool. They drafted Ricardo Meekins at 6 overall. He is a superstar X-Factor, leads the Bears to a ring in his rookie season. He makes the Pro Bowl, has accomplished so much. The Bears win 2 rings before the Raiders can win any in this franchise. And then we check the retirements of 2039. And Denzel Stockton has called it a career after 16 seasons. He has reached the end of his football journey. He became the main character of this franchise, as the quarterback tends to do, especially when they're very divisive and there's a lot of debate over if they're the right guy or not. Ultimately, Denzel Stockton would be a franchise quarterback, but was not a great playoff performer. A lot of these playoff losses we've covered were uncompetitive from the early days of his career down to his last Super Bowl. But ultimately, he wins a title, and he puts together big numbers. It is a very successful career for him. I only wish it could have been as successful for some of the other great picks of the series. He ends up as a Hall of Fame quarterback, by the way. The last thing I wanted to see is if I did a 10-year sim, would the Raiders eventually be able to win? So I settled in for a 10-year simulation while I was the owner of the Saints. And what ended up happening is I lost the team. I think it was one of the financial probation situations. I ran out of money and lost the team. So I'm like, all right, did the Raiders ever win? And yeah, they won the most recent Super Bowl. So there it is, the only one they ultimately win in this series. In that 10-year sim, there were more cool things happening in the league. You're going to notice the Washington Commanders become a dynasty. They would dominate the NFC and go to 4 straight Super Bowls, winning 3 of them. The Vikings even win a Super Bowl. Hooray. And then one of their Super Bowl wins also happened against the Raiders. But the Raiders do get a ring, but by the time it happened, I don't think there was a single player on the roster I had a hand in adding to the team. Michael Harrington was no longer their quarterback. He had moved on. I don't recognize anybody on their roster. And Max Bishop, you'll notice here, he was the quarterback of the Commanders during this era. And he did all of this in like 8 years. He led them to 3 titles while missing his entire second season, essentially. And that put him as one of the highest legacy quarterbacks in the whole franchise. Michael Harrington was finishing out his career back home in Colorado, and he actually did not end up having the success I thought he would. He put together a couple franchise quarterback seasons, and then was very mid-tier for a while and could not get the Raiders playoff wins. Ultimately, Patrick Mahomes finishes with the second most legacy, but Jarvis Portis, that star defensive tackle of the Browns, ends up with 5 rings and second in legacy score. Max Crosby, of course, no rings, but goes to the Hall of Fame. The same is true for JoJo Faulkner. I wish I had followed him a little more closely after he left the Raiders. Loved his story in this episode. Stockton, he's 31st in legacy. And Michael Harrington only makes it to 89th with no Super Bowl titles. And that, everybody, is the end of our journey with the Las Vegas Raiders. I was not successful in this series trying to get them a Super Bowl. I did what I thought was everything I could. I should have tried some more different things. I still enjoyed this series, but I learned a lot about how I've kind of strayed away from kind of the vision I had with this style of content and earlier series from, let's say, the Bucks and Cardinals era. And I've definitely learned a lot in how I want to attack this type of series going forward. I am very excited to move on to College Football 25. I believe I will be playing it tomorrow, and I'm bringing a new series to the channel, and I'm looking to hit the ground running with that game. Thank you all for watching the longest video here in the series. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you enjoy this style of content, it's along the lines of what I've wanted to do for some side fun rebuilds. It was more fast-paced. We covered a lot of ground, but I think I did it my way, and I like how this has come out. So I love your feedback down below. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and leave any feedback you have in the comments. Take care, everybody. I'll be seeing you on the college gridiron soon enough. Have a great night.